Greetings, all you book lovers out there. This is Michael Romeo, and I'm here to talk about books. And I am so glad that you've taken the time to come here out of your busy schedule and take some time to spend it with me. Today, I am talking about my favorite century. My favorite century in a number of ways, but especially how it relates to the books I enjoy. And that is the 20th century. The 20th century was such a dynamic collection of years. It started out one way, ended completely differently. And yeah, you can say that about a lot of centuries, but the changes in the 20th century were so rapid and so dynamic. There was so much social change and political change and just world changes that the century itself is a story that is rich with so many factors. You know, we had at the end of the 19th century, we had the Industrial Revolution, which proceeded into the beginning of the 20th century. And automobiles became a fixture, and technology was just beginning. It was in its infancy. And then, you know, as we went into the 1920s, there was a lot of social change, and then the Roaring Twenties, the last part of the 20s, the Roaring Twenties came in, and we had the youthful generation that took to their own way of partying, their own way of enjoying themselves, and just bucking against societal norms. And then, of course, that decade ended with the crash on Wall Street at the end of that decade, and that sent us into the Great Depression of the 1930s. And the 1930s was a time of great poverty along most of the United States and in other parts of the world as well. But the United States really experienced it really bad. They called it the Great Depression for a reason. And then we had recessions and depressions before too, and the way we have always gotten out of it was to go to war to fix the economy. Now, whether or not that was the reason for going to war, I'm not sure. I don't know that was always the reason for going to war in those times, but the effect was it repaired the economy. And it's what happened again. We went to war, World War II. And we came into the 1940s, where all of a sudden the economy is repairing itself, and the war's going on. And then the war ended with the dropping of the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan. And that brought in a brief period of peace leading into the 50s. And the 50s were, on the surface, the idyllic society, in that the nuclear family was the example of how society should be. And everybody lived like, you know, the Cleavers in Leave It to Beaver, and the Ozzie and Harriet family, and it was portrayed on TV as the perfect family life. But underneath the surface, we had a lot going on. There was McCarthyism, where Senator McCarthy started an attack on communism that ended up affecting a lot of innocent people getting blacklisted, people getting arrested, people just their lives destroyed because of McCarthy. And then we had the Korean conflict, which affected the 50s. And then as all of this is wrapping up, we go into the 60s, which was the swinging 60s. Rock and roll was becoming the music of choice for the younger generation. And we had the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. We had the assassination of civil rights activist Martin Luther King, and also Bobby Kennedy assassinated. And we had a growth in recreational drug use. We had a growth in the sexual revolution. Feminism was getting a foothold, and getting a very steady foothold finally. And the gay rights movement was starting. And then we had Vietnam. Vietnam came in and had such a profound effect on American culture. Then we go into the 70s, technology growing. I forgot to mention, back in the 50s, we had the Cold War, which extended all the way to the 80s. And we had the space race and the arms race. And all of this going into the 70s. And then the 70s were kind of a free and easy decade, but yet things were still growing, things were still changing, society was changing, values were changing, mores and mores were changing. And then we go into the 80s, where we have the end of the Cold War with the breaking down of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of Russian communism, Soviet communism, I should say. And then the AIDS crisis hits in the 1980s. Actually, it started in the late 70s, but it really became known and horrible in the 1980s. And the 80s became an excess in sexual license and recreational drug use, and it was, again, a wild decade. And then we go into the 90s, where everything centered around technology. And there's so much in the century. I didn't mention the civil rights movement. I mentioned Martin Luther King, but there was the whole civil rights movement in the 60s. And there was so much. And what I love about it, and how this relates to books, is that the books of the century reflect it all. They captured it, whether it's in literature or in popular novels and nonfiction. It's been captured in thousands upon thousands of books. All the changes, all the debates, all the political climates. It's there in the books, and you can spend an entire adult lifetime reading books of the 20th century, and the variety is astounding. And you get everything from pop culture to heavy politics to heavy war to just, and it's like a never-ending fountain of reading. And some of the best reading comes out of the 20th century. And what I've done here is I've compiled a list of books that are kind of a tour of the 20th century. And it obviously is not an exhaustive list, because that would go on for days. And I certainly don't want this video to be a 5-hour video. But I've drawn from the books I've read. There's not a book on here that I haven't read, which means that some books that should be on the list of a tour of the 20th century are not there because I haven't read them and I can't speak about them personally. An example would be The Grapes of Wrath, which, to my understanding, is iconic when it comes to depicting the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl disaster. but I haven't read it, so I don't have a personal experience with it. So I just stuck with books that I have a personal experience with. And we're going to start in 1918 with one of my favorite books, My Antonia by Willa Cather, which is just a social drama about the early part of the century in the Midwest. And it gives a wonderful slice of life of what things were like for people who were based agriculturally and I just lost my train of thought. It just derailed, and I do not do good at editing, so just bear with me. So yes, it was an agrarian society. Some people had it tough, some people had it okay, and it's just, My Antonia is a wonderful novel to get you started in the century. And then in 1920, F. Scott Fitzgerald wrote This Side of Paradise, which is a wonderful novel about social change. And again, it's leading into the Roaring Twenties, which another F. Scott Fitzgerald book captures beautifully is The Great Gatsby. That is the Roaring Twenties, and it's all about wealth, it's all about greed, it's just so much of what was happening in the late 1920s. And it's a short book, doesn't take much to tell it. Then in 1929, I included the book Red Harvest by Dashiell Hammett, which shows the view of crime and corruption. Crime and corruption was definitely happening with Prohibition and the gangster era. This was a big thing. There was a lot of black market activity going on, and Red Harvest does a great job of capturing that part of the late 20s. And then I skipped to 1944 with a book called A Bell for Adano by John Hersey, which is a Pulitzer Prize winner. And it's a World War II drama about the American experience fighting in Italy against the fascists. 1946, John Hersey gave us Hiroshima, which was a depiction of Hiroshima after the dropping of the atomic bomb and the effect it had on that society and the world at large. It's a stunning book and very difficult to read because it is on the traumatic side. 1953 gave us a book called Go Tell It on the Mountain by James Baldwin, which is an ethnic drama showing the black experience in inner city New York and focusing on one family. It's a wonderful read and gives you a feel for that time, for the 50s in a big city. 1959, The Longest Day came out by Cornelius Ryan, and that is a World War II history. It's nonfiction, and it's all about the D-Day invasion in France and the battle against the Nazis. 1966 gave us a book that many people labeled as trash, but didn't stop it from becoming a bestseller. In fact, it probably helped it. And that is The Valley of the Dolls by Jacqueline Suzanne. And the reason I included in this list is because, to me, it is a great view of the rise of feminism. It's not directly that. It's not in your face driving the feminist agenda. But what it does show is women who had been working during the war while the men were off fighting are now wanting careers instead of being a housewife and mother. They want to have a career. They want to have a job. They want to have a life that's not ruled by men. And Valley of the Dolls captures that struggle for women, I think, impeccably, and yes, there is some what people would call trashy. I didn't think it was terribly offensive myself, but then again, this was written back in the 60s, so things were a little different then. But Valley of the Dolls, Feminism, great entry. And then in 1974, a book came out called The Glory and the Dream by William Manchester, and this is a book of U.S. history, which takes us from the beginning of the Great Depression, right after the stock market crashed, and brings us right up through the end of Vietnam. And it is a very thick book. It's a monster of a book. And it is just, it reads like a novel. Even though it's a history book, it reads with the intensity of a novel. And William Manchester did a wonderful job on it. 1976 gave us a nice little novel called Heartbreak Hotel by Anne Rivers Sidens. And while it came out in the 70s, it was set in the 60s. And it's, in one way, a coming-of-age story, but it's also a civil rights story, as the main character, who's grown up in a very privileged Southern family, graduates high school, goes on to college, and discovers the civil rights movement, and gets involved, and watches the effects of the civil rights movement on her friends and family. 1980, another Pulitzer Prize winning book, A Confederacy of Dunces by John Kennedy Toole, is one of the best pieces of social satire to come out of the 20th century. And it too reflects a lot of viewpoints, a lot of social change, a lot of character. And it was written actually long before it was published. I don't know how many of you know this story, but John Kennedy Toole wrote it, could not get it published to save himself. Got so depressed that he committed suicide. And his mother, after his death, continued to peddle the book to publishers and eventually got it published in 1980 when it won the Pulitzer Prize. 1987 gave us a very powerful book called And the Band Played On by Randy Shilts. It's all about the AIDS crisis and the gay rights movement, and also about the political debacle that took place over dealing with AIDS. 1988, a novel called Breathing Lessons by Ann Tyler is a wonderful exploration of social change and how one couple deals with change in their lives, their recent empty nesters, and the whole action of the book takes place pretty much in one day as they're driving to and from a friend's wedding. And the discussions they have are all about issues that were prevalent in the 80s. 1990, The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien is a drama of the Vietnam War conflict. Beautiful book. It was shortlisted for the Pulitzer Prize. Didn't win. I think it should have. It was a brilliant book and gives you such a feel for what the soldiers in the Vietnam conflict went through, what they had to put up with, what they experienced. It is, in some places, a gut-wrenching book, but overall it is a very powerful read. And then I've got, to wrap it up, 1993, a book called The Shipping News by Annie Proulx. And it's a bit of a social exploration. It's a character study, and it deals with society in the 1990s and also prior to that, because there are characters who have experienced stuff earlier in their lives that affect them in the 90s. So that's just my abbreviated list of a tour of the 20th century. Again, there are other books that could have been put on here that I haven't read. I thought afterwards of other books that I could have put on here that I did read, but then the list would just keep getting longer and longer and longer. I had to draw the line somewhere. Uh, like I thought later I should have put in Catch 22, which is another World War II satire. But the books of the 20th century are vibrant in a way that I don't see in other eras. There are wonderful books that preceded the 20th century that are nice reads, that are excellent reads. And there are books afterwards, and even right up until today, that are great reads. There are books of the 21st century that I totally enjoyed. But I've never seen before, in my reading experience, the lineup of books from the 20th century that captures the rapidly changing structure of society, whether it's the politics, the sociology, the wars, the economy. It's all there. And whether you like nonfiction or fiction, whether you like popular books versus literary, it doesn't matter. The plethora of books is there for you to just dive in and choose from. If some of you are my age and grew up through a good part of the 20th century and experienced it firsthand and probably enjoyed a lot of these books. Some of you are very young. Some of you have been born in the 21st century and now you're adult readers. That makes me feel old, but that's okay. Go back to the 20th century and start diving into some of these older books and just look at what those of my age and older encountered and went through and experienced and witnessed. And it's a journey that once you start it, I'm sure will captivate you. And it'll be a rabbit hole that you'll go down. And I hope you enjoy it as much as I do. So that's my little soapbox about the 20th century. I love the century. I love the history of it. I love the books from it. And I hope you all find the enjoyment in them that I do. Talk to you again soon. Bye.